so in this part we're going to be cleaning up the model, doing a bit of scraping here and there just to get it nice and smooth, remove any mould lines, everything like that, remove all the gates, clean it up in general, and then I'm going to give it a quick wash, which is just a bit of dish soap in a bowl with some warm water, lukewarm, not hot. If you do hot water you run the risk of bending the model too much, because it makes the resin quite bendy essentially. Quick clean up, and then yeah, we're going to stick it together. I decided to run this video at double speed because I didn't really want to do videos on cleaning up the model and then another one on sticking it together. It just seemed a bit excessive and somewhat on the boring side. So just a quick clean up. I found quite a large sort of deposit of resin on her head. Not sure whether it was the remains of a gate or quite supposed to be there, but I decided to sort of cut it out to sort of mimic the hair around it, and there's enough sort of fine detail that I can fade it in there quite nicely. Found the body was quite a nice mould, found the one and only mould line just down that side there. Nothing too major to clean up. That red tool is, I found it in Halfords. It's got sort of fibres coming out at the end of it, and you can use it for polishing sort of metals, and I use it quite a bit for sort of cleaning up metal models, but it's also quite handy for just sort of brushing away bits of material that you're scraping off it. So that's the body done. The base, I decided it had been, the way it had been cast, I was just going to smooth off the bottom of it and take any rough edges off the side, just so that it sticks down quite nicely. I'm going to stick her into once she's on the scenic base, I'm going to stick that into the sort of, I don't know, I think it's a 50mm round base, and sort of that'll hide quite a lot of the edges, and it'll fit in there quite. I mean, it's designed to be fitted into that kind of thing, so there's no problem there. Didn't actually need to do much clean up on that. There was no mould lines, just clip that little bit off the bottom, clean it up a tad and just make sure it fits. That small branch coming out to the side of it I actually snapped off whilst I was washing it, which was quite irritating. It just shows how brittle this stuff can be. These small pieces, they had a fair amount of mould lines on, which I was fairly surprised about, and things like that are best cleaned up whilst they're still on the sprue, simply because it's just so difficult to hold bits that small. When you're clipping them off the sprue, avoid clipping right next to the model, just in case you slip or the cutters move or anything like that. You clip a little bit away, as I did then, and then just clean up the remainder with a sharp knife. And decided to give that one a quick sand down as well, just to make everything match. Unfortunately the arrow was a little bit bent, nothing major, nothing I can't fix with a bit of hot water. Basically you just dunk it in hot water, sort of just off boiling water's good, for about sort of 10 to 15 seconds, and the resin becomes quite pliable. And you then pull it out, straighten it with your fingers to the position that you want it, and then just run it under cold water to cool it back down again. And that essentially resets the resin back in place, and you can do that with quite a lot of models. I had to do that with a fair amount of the Sedition Wars models. Mike McVeigh actually put a video up on how to do that on his channel on YouTube, so you can always go check that out. It's quite a handy technique actually. The bow had a lot of gates on it and a fair amount of flashing. Luckily the flashing was extremely thin, so it came off quite easily. Here I was checking the fit on the bow, trying to work out where the bow was going to go so that I could position it correctly. Worked out where it was going to go and decided that gate had to be removed. Those gates are essentially holes in the mould to allow the resin to either be injected or to escape, so that you don't end up with air bubbles. You're going to get them on. It's a artifact from the casting process, and you're always going to get them, so it's a good idea to learn how to sort of clean them up. They're usually, if you've got a good caster and a good mould maker, they'll be in places that are very easy to clean up with no detail to be obscured. I've seen some that have been sort of right in the middle of fairly detailed areas and it's just ruined the model, but these, because they're sort of boutique miniatures from Studio McVeigh, they're very, very good. those. So there you go, there's all the bits. So these are the glues I'm using. That's a thick glue, and the Zap CA is a thin glue. They're both cyanoacrylates, which is super glue essentially. Zip Kicker is a fantastic sort of spray, and it essentially accelerates the drying process of super glues, cyanoacrylate-based glues. And you know, the downside of it is that the bond that it forms isn't as strong. It can be quite brittle and it can be snapped fairly easily, but with these miniatures, they're display miniatures. You're not going to be gaming with them, so they don't need to be strong joins, good bonds, things like that. So you can kind of live with that brittleness. Whereas for a gaming miniature, obviously you're going to want to sort of super glue it properly and sort of make sure you've got nice strong joins. So quickly checking the fit of the arm, just finding out where it's going to go. The eye line that she's got is quite odd. It's not where the bow wants to go. She doesn't look like she's sighting down it. So what I decided to do was just sort of move the bow slightly outwards, more towards her eye line, where she's actually looking, so that it actually looks like she's sighting down the bow. The downside of this is that I had to clean up that arm to give that arm the right angle, and I'm going to also need to sort of do a bit of gap filling on that join as well, because there's a fairly large gap in there. The video camera decided to run out of battery at this point in time, and I didn't notice until I managed to stick that arm on, so you'll have to bear with me. But here we go, sticking the second arm on. And one day I'll learn where my camera frame is, but suffice to say that the arm's now in position, and I decided that the easiest way of actually making sure that the arrow was straight was to actually stick it to the bow. For this I decided to use the thin cyanoacrylate. When you can see it in the pot there, it's literally water. This stuff goes everywhere. You have to be really, really careful with it. But the upside is that it dries very, very quickly, even without Zip Kicker, and it's a incredibly strong bond. You just have to be incredibly careful with it. Now at this point in time I decided that the best thing to do was to stick it onto the base, because the quiver was just going to get in the way of holding it for positioning. I also was debating about pinning her to the base to give it a bit of extra strength, but I found that there's a sort of bit of the tree trunk sort of behind the hole, which actually sort of holds her leg and goes up onto the sort of bottom of the skirt quite nicely. So I decided that although it looks like it's a fairly small join, it should actually be pretty strong. And again, you're not going to be gaming with this miniature, so you know, it works perfectly as a join. So last little bit on. Same again, dobber glue, quick little spray, Zip Kicker. You really don't need much of that stuff. A can will last you a fairly long time. I hate to imagine how many miniatures that can's built. And there you go, all built up nicely. Looks really good actually. Nice dynamic pose. See if I can get a close up of her. There we go. So yep, nice dynamic pose. As you can see in there, there's the gap I'm going to have to fill in. Nothing too horrendous. I can do that off camera at some point. There's no real art behind it. It's literally a matter of sort of sticking stuff into the join until you filled it in, really. So there you go. Next time I think will be undercoating.